So here's the thing. I, 37M, have always been there for my family, especially my niece. She's 13, and her mom, my sister-in-law, has had a rough go of it since my brother passed a few years back. I stepped in where I could, helped with expenses, made sure my niece didn't go without. I never thought twice about it, honestly. Family's family, right? Anyway, the day this all went down started like any other. I was heading home after a regular day at work, looking forward to putting my feet up and maybe watching some TV. But as soon as I walked through the door, I noticed something was off. My phone was ringing nonstop. I checked it and saw a few missed calls from my sister-in-law, and some messages too, though none of them made much sense. She just kept saying, "You need to pick up. It's serious," and "You're in trouble." No context? Nothing. Now, I'll admit, I brushed it off at first. I figured it was some drama with her finances or whatever. She'd been in and out of financial messes lately, and I'd had to bail her out before, so I ignored it. Figured I'd call her back later once I'd settled in. But then, maybe an hour later, I got another call, but this time it was from a blocked number. I answered, figuring it was some scam call, but then the person on the other end said, "Hello, is this my name? This is Detective so-and-so. We need you to come down to the station." That got my attention. I can't even explain the dread that crept up. It's that feeling where you know something's seriously wrong and you have no clue what it is, but your gut is just screaming at you. I asked what was going on, but they wouldn't tell me anything over the phone, just insisted I come down as soon as possible. So I grabbed my keys and went straight to the station, trying to mentally run through every possible reason I could be there. But I couldn't come up with anything that made sense. When I got there, they led me into one of those cold, sterile rooms with a metal table and chairs, and the whole atmosphere made me feel like I was in some bad crime show. The detective sat down across from me, looking dead serious, and asked if I knew why I was there. I said no, but by that point my mind was racing, trying to piece together what the hell was going on. Then he told me. He said my niece had come forward with some serious accusations against me. I didn't understand at first, just blinked at him, trying to process. But when he repeated himself and explained exactly what she was claiming, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. She was accusing me of something I wouldn't even repeat out loud, something that, honestly, made my skin crawl just hearing it. I was stunned, completely frozen in shock. My first instinct was to deny it, of course. I told the detective this had to be some kind of mistake, that I'd never do anything like that, and that I couldn't believe she'd say something so horrible. I mean, this was my niece, a kid I'd practically helped raise since her dad passed. It just didn't make any sense. But here's the thing. The detective was looking at me like I was guilty right off the bat, like he'd already made up his mind. He said they'd already started an investigation and that things weren't looking good for me. Apparently, they'd talked to her mother too, and she was fully supportive of her daughter. Hearing that stung, but it also confused the hell out of me. I mean, why would my sister-in-law just back this up? Where was all this even coming from? At that point, I was panicking. It's one thing to have someone make accusations behind your back, but to hear it from a detective while you're sitting there in an interrogation room, it's a whole other level of fear. He kept pressing, asking if I had anything to hide, if there was anything I wanted to come clean about. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind, like this was all some sort of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Eventually, he asked if they could search my house. He made it sound like I didn't have a choice, so I agreed. I mean, I had nothing to hide, and at that point, I just wanted to do whatever I could to prove my innocence. But the idea of them going through my home, combing through everything like I was some sort of criminal, made me sick. After hours of questioning and waiting around, they finally let me go, but they didn't really clear anything up. The detective just told me to stay available, and that they'd be following up soon. I left that station in a daze, my mind spinning with questions I didn't have answers to. How did things come to this? Why would my niece say something so awful? And what the hell was my sister-in-law thinking, backing her up like that? When I got home, the reality hit me like a ton of bricks. This accusation could ruin my life, my job, my relationships, everything I'd worked for. It could all go down the drain because of a lie. I paced around my house, replaying the day's events over and over, trying to find some kind of logic to it all, but I kept coming up blank. My niece and I had never had issues. In fact, I thought we were close. I'd spent countless hours helping her, looking out for her, being there when she needed someone. It just didn't add up. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the detective's face, heard my niece's accusation echoing in my head. The sheer unfairness of it all gnawed at me, and I kept swinging between anger and disbelief. How could family betray you like this? Why would someone I'd trusted do something so cruel? I kept thinking there had to be some explanation, some misunderstanding that could clear all this up. But deep down, a part of me was starting to fear the worst. My sister-in-law, her behavior, her willingness to back up this lie. Something about it felt too calculated, too purposeful. It wasn't just a misunderstanding or a mistake. It was starting to feel like an attack, a targeted attempt to ruin me. The next morning, I called in sick to work, too drained and distracted to even pretend I could get through a normal day. And as I sat there staring blankly at my phone, I realized I had a choice to make. I could try to push through, pretend this was all going to blow over, or I could start fighting back, digging into why they were doing this and exposing the truth. I didn't know what I'd uncover, but I was ready to find out. After that nightmare interrogation, I was left totally wrecked. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything other than what my niece had said about me. I was trying to make sense of it all, but every thought just led to more frustration and confusion. How could a kid I'd helped so much suddenly turn on me like this? And why would my sister-in-law, my late brother's wife, back her up on something so out of line? The worst part was that the police hadn't just brushed it off after she'd said it. They were taking her seriously, investigating me as if I'd actually done what she claimed. The entire situation felt insane. I was just sitting there in my own home, my life now under a cloud of suspicion. Everything around me felt different, like my whole house was tainted somehow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was going on here, like there was some missing piece to all this I couldn't see. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a kid saying something dumb. It felt planned, like there was a reason behind it. But what? Then out of nowhere, I got a call from the detective handling my case. He told me they needed to bring my niece in for another interview, this time without her mother present. That caught my attention. I didn't know why they'd separate them, but if the police were thinking something was fishy, that was a bit of a relief. It was like a tiny crack of hope that maybe this whole thing would get cleared up. I don't know what went on in that room during her second interview. All I know is that, a couple of hours later, I got a call that changed everything. The detective sounded different, like he was suddenly on my side. He told me that my niece had admitted to making the accusation up. I felt the air leave my lungs. She made it up? I mean, I wanted it to be false, obviously since it was a lie. But hearing it confirmed was just something else. I felt a strange mix of relief, anger, and honestly, just pure betrayal. I asked him what she'd said, why she would lie like that, but he said he couldn't give all the details over the phone. All he told me was that her mom, my sister-in-law, had pressured her into it. Hearing that, I can't describe it. There's this saying, blood is thicker than water, right? But in that moment, I felt like my own family had thrown me under the bus without a second thought. My sister-in-law had pushed her own daughter, her own kid, to lie and say that I'd done something unforgivable. For what? It didn't make any sense. When I met with the detective in person, he laid it all out. My niece had confessed that her mom told her to make the accusation because they needed money, and my sister-in-law thought this would be an easy way to blackmail me. The entire plan was to force me into a corner where I'd be so scared of the damage to my reputation that I'd pay up, stay quiet, and save my own skin. I sat there, stunned, while he explained it. Every word was like a stab in the back. I'd always known that my sister-in-law had struggled with finances after my brother died. That's why I'd stepped in so many times to help. Groceries, clothes for my niece, a little extra here and there to make sure they were okay. And she'd turned that against me, weaponized it to try to squeeze even more money out of me. The detective explained that, in her statement, my niece said she'd tried to push back at first. She knew it was wrong, she said, and she was scared to do it. But her mom had told her that they had no other options, that this was the only way. Imagine that, a 13-year-old being told by her own mother to do something so messed up because it was the only way. I was disgusted. I'd always thought I knew my sister-in-law. I mean, she's family. She married my brother, and when he passed, I felt like it was my duty to step in, to be there for them. But hearing how she manipulated her daughter into saying something that could destroy my entire life, I couldn't wrap my head around it. How desperate. How selfish do you have to be to put your kid through that? The detective asked if I had any idea she might be in such deep financial trouble. I told him honestly that she'd mentioned money issues a few times, but nothing ever that extreme. She was always vague about it, saying she might need a little help, that sort of thing. And yeah, I'd helped her out before, but I had no idea she'd gotten to the point where she'd turn on me like this. I couldn't sit still. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. I kept thinking about all the times I'd trusted her, let her into my life, into my home. And now, knowing she was capable of this level of betrayal, it was unreal. I'd heard of people backstabbing each other for money, But this was my family. I never thought it had happened to me, let alone from the people I'd been bending over backward to help. And then there was my niece. I didn't know what to feel about her anymore. Part of me felt sorry for her. She's just a kid, after all. But she'd still gone along with it. She'd still let those words leave her mouth, knowing full well what they could do to me. I couldn't stop picturing her face, the kid I'd helped raise, now forever associated with a lie that nearly shattered my life. The detective told me they'd follow up with my sister-in-law, but he couldn't guarantee anything. He said that even with my niece's confession, it'd be tricky proving the extent of my sister-in-law's involvement, especially if she tried to deny it. I was furious, but also powerless. The thought that she might somehow dodge the consequences for all this made me feel sick. I thanked the detective, shook his hand, and left the station. I walked home in a daze, still trying to process everything. I felt like I was split in two. On one hand, I was relieved that my name was cleared, that the lie had been exposed. On the other, I was filled with rage and sadness. This was my family. My own flesh and blood had tried to ruin me for money. When I got home, I just sat there in silence, replaying every moment over and over. The relief of being proven innocent was there, but it was buried under layers of anger, betrayal, and hurt. I didn't know what to do next. All I knew was that things would never be the same again. After finding out the truth from the detective, I barely kept myself together. The fact that my sister-in-law had gone so far as to use her own daughter to frame me, it's hard to explain what that feels like. The shock, the anger, the betrayal, it all just hit me in waves. But at the core of it, I knew what I had to do. I had to confront her. There was no way I could let this slide without hearing her pathetic excuse for why she thought any of this was even remotely okay. I didn't even bother calling. I drove straight to her place, my mind racing the whole way. I kept thinking of every moment over the past few years, every time I'd helped her out, every dollar I'd given to make sure they were okay. And she turned around and did this? My blood was boiling, and I didn't even know what I'd say when I saw her. All I knew was that I needed answers. When I got there, she answered the door looking surprised but not scared, which somehow made me angrier. Here she was, standing there like she hadn't just tried to ruin my life. I barely managed to hold myself back from exploding right then. Instead, I looked her dead in the eye and said, "We need to talk. Now." She tried to play it cool, giving me a fake smile and asking if I wanted to sit down, like this was some kind of normal conversation. I wasn't having it. "Why?" I asked, cutting to the chase. "Why would you do this? Why would you push your own daughter to make up something that serious?" At first she looked taken aback, like she hadn't expected me to be so direct. But then she recovered and gave me this tired, dramatic sigh. "Look," she said, "you don't understand how hard it's been. I'm a single mother, and things have been really rough since your brother passed. You have money, and I don't, and—" "Stop!" I interrupted. I didn't want to hear her excuses. "You tried to ruin my life. You told your daughter to accuse me of something disgusting. Do you have any idea what you were doing?" She crossed her arms and looked away, acting all defensive. "I didn't have a choice," she muttered, still not meeting my eyes. "You're well off, and we're struggling. I was desperate, okay? Desperate people do desperate things." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Desperate people do desperate things? That's her reasoning? "You thought dragging my name through the mud was an okay solution because you were low on cash?" I practically yelled. "I've helped you every single time you've asked, and this is how you repay me?" She rolled her eyes, which only set me off even more. "Oh, please. You act like you've done so much for us, but a few handouts here and there don't exactly solve all my problems. I needed real help." Real help? I couldn't stop myself from laughing at how absurd this was. "I've paid for groceries, clothes, school supplies, you name it. How much help were you planning to milk me for?" She stayed silent, but her jaw was clenched, and she finally looked up at me, clearly annoyed. "It's easy for you to say. You don't know what it's like, struggling day in and day out. I thought if I could just scare you a little, maybe you'd finally give us what we actually need." "Scare me?" The word echoed in my head. "You wanted to scare me into handing over money by having your daughter accuse me of something unforgivable. Do you understand how messed up that is? Or have you lost all sense of reality?" Her face hardened and she said, "It wasn't supposed to go this far. I thought you'd just pay up quietly, maybe feel bad enough to help us out long term. You have to understand, I didn't mean for it to get out of hand like this." Get out of hand. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples. "You told your daughter to accuse me of a crime, a crime. Did you even consider what this would do to me, or what it would do to her?" She looked away again, not saying anything. It was like she'd built up this wall around herself where nothing could get through. She had no remorse, no sense of the destruction she'd nearly caused. She just kept muttering about how tough her life was, as if that somehow justified everything. I trusted you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I trusted you, and I trusted her. I've tried to be there for you both ever since my brother passed, and you used that against me. You weaponized your own daughter to try to blackmail me. Do you even hear yourself? She huffed, finally meeting my gaze with an indignant look. Fine, maybe it was a little extreme. But like I said, desperate times call for desperate measures. I shook my head, feeling a mix of anger and disgust that I couldn't put into words. There's a difference between being desperate and being cruel, I said. And what you did was downright cruel. You tried to ruin my life for money, and you dragged your own kid into it. She didn't respond, just crossed her arms and stared at the floor like some petulant child who'd been scolded. I realized then that nothing I said was going to get through to her. She convinced herself that she was the victim, that her actions were somehow justified because she was struggling. You know what? I finally said, unable to hold back the bitterness. We're done. Don't call me for money. Don't ask me for help. You're on your own from here on out. That seemed to snap her out of her sulk. She looked up, eyes wide, and started protesting. But, but what about my daughter? She needs stability. She needs a mom who doesn't use her as a weapon, I shot back. And you clearly aren't that. You've made it pretty clear that you're willing to use her as a pawn if it suits you. So no, I won't be there to clean up your mess. She tried to guilt trip me after that, saying I was being too harsh, that my niece shouldn't suffer because of her mistakes. But I'd had enough. I told her I wasn't backing down, and I walked out. For the first time, I felt like I was actually breathing. The confrontation didn't give me any closure, though. If anything, I walked away feeling even more bitter. My sister-in-law had twisted things to make herself the victim, as if her struggles somehow justified everything she'd done. And the worst part was, she still didn't understand the damage she'd almost caused. I realized then that she didn't care about me or her daughter. She cared about getting what she wanted, no matter what it cost. When I got home, I felt drained. I thought confronting her would bring me some kind of peace, but all it did was make me realize how deeply she'd betrayed me. It was like a switch had flipped, and I finally saw her for who she really was, a manipulative, selfish person who would do anything to get her way. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. I couldn't trust her ever again. After that confrontation, I felt completely drained. I thought finally calling her out and cutting her off would bring me some kind of closure, maybe even peace. But if anything, I felt even more rattled. It was like I'd spent the whole time talking to a wall. She had no remorse, no real understanding of what she'd done. The woman honestly thought she was the victim in all this. When I got home, I just sat in silence for a long time, replaying everything in my mind. I tried to brush it off, tell myself that I was free of her, that I didn't owe her anything anymore. But every time I thought of her twisted excuses, that lack of remorse in her eyes, something boiled up in me again. She'd almost ruined my life, using her own daughter to try to manipulate and extort me, and she acted like it was nothing, like I was the one being unreasonable for not handing over cash. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the people I know, the people who might have heard about the accusations before they were cleared up. And even though the police had wrapped up the investigation with my name cleared, there was still this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that the damage was already done. People don't just forget things like that, even when the truth comes out. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just let this go, not after what she'd tried to pull. It wasn't enough to cut her off and move on with my life. I had to hold her accountable. If she was willing to go this far once, who's to say she wouldn't try it again with someone else? And the worst part was, she dragged her own daughter into this mess. That kid deserved better than a mother who would teach her to lie and scheme to get what she wanted. I called the detective who'd handled my case, told him I wanted to press charges against her. He seemed a bit surprised at first, probably thinking that since the accusation had been proven false, I'd want to just move on. But when I told him everything she'd said during our confrontation, the blackmail, the manipulation, the way she'd pressured her daughter, he understood. He asked if I was sure. He warned me that pressing charges wouldn't be easy, that it would be a drawn-out process, and I'd probably have to relive a lot of what had happened. I knew that, and yeah, it scared me, knowing I'd be diving back into the mess I'd just barely crawled out of. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't let fear keep me from doing the right thing. So I told him I was sure. Absolutely. This wasn't just for me, it was for my niece too. That kid needed a wake-up call, something to show her that actions have consequences, even when you're being pressured by the person you trust most. And I hoped, maybe, it'd be a wake-up call for my sister-in-law as well, though honestly, I doubted she'd ever truly get it. The next few weeks were tense. The police had to go over everything again, take my statement in more detail, even ask me about past times I'd helped her financially. I had to drag up memories I'd tried to forget, and it was tough, but I kept reminding myself why I was doing it. I had to make sure this didn't happen to anyone else. I had to protect myself and anyone else who might have been her next target. Then, finally, the day came. The police showed up at her door and arrested her. I'll be honest, I didn't think I'd feel anything but relief, but the reality of it hit harder than I expected. This was still my family after all, my late brother's wife, my niece's mother, and now she was being taken away in handcuffs because of her own actions. But the thought of what she almost did to me, how close she'd come to wrecking my life, kept me grounded. This was on her. A few people heard about the arrest, of course. Family talk spreads like wildfire. I got calls from relatives asking what happened, telling me I was out of line, saying I should have just let it go. But I explained everything, from the accusation to the blackmail. And for the most part, people started to see things my way. Some still thought I was harsh, but others were shocked, especially when they realized my sister-in-law had used her own daughter to try and get to me. One relative actually told me, "You're doing the right thing. People need to learn there are consequences." That gave me some comfort, knowing at least a few people understood where I was coming from. The day after her arrest, I found myself thinking about my niece. I knew CPS would be involved now, that she'd probably be placed somewhere temporarily. Part of me felt responsible for her, guilty even, but then I remembered she'd been manipulated too. I couldn't protect her from the consequences of her actions, but maybe this would be her chance to see things clearly, to understand that her mother's actions weren't okay, but no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, it still stung. I had cared for that kid, treated her like my own, and she'd gone along with her mom's scheme without any thought for what it would do to me. It's not something you just get over. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding, trying to get back to some kind of normalcy. But the whole experience had left its mark. I was more cautious now, more guarded. Family didn't mean the same thing it used to. I'd learned the hard way that loyalty can be one-sided, and people you trust can turn on you for reasons you'll never understand. When I look back on that decision to press charges, there's no regret. I did what I had to do. I protected myself, and maybe in a way, I helped my niece too. I hope one day she'll realize that this was all because her mother took advantage of both of us. I hope it's a lesson she'll never forget. In the days after my sister-in-law's arrest, I felt like I was in this weird in-between place. Part relief, part regret, and a whole lot of anger that hadn't really gone anywhere. My family was pretty divided over what had happened. Some people thought I was completely in the right, and others thought I'd gone too far pressing charges against her, that I should have just let it slide and moved on. It was funny in a way. Everyone had an opinion, but no one really understood what I'd been through. I tried not to let it bother me. At the end of the day, I knew why I'd done it. I couldn't let what she did go unpunished, not when she'd come so close to destroying my life. And honestly, I hoped it would teach my niece a lesson too. But even knowing that, it didn't make things easier. My family, the people I thought I could count on, felt like strangers now. Going back to work was strange. For a while, I felt like I had this label stuck to me, like everyone could see what I'd been through even if they didn't know the details. I know it was all in my head, but I couldn't shake it. I was hyper aware of every interaction, wondering if people were thinking things or whispering behind my back. My boss and a few close friends knew what happened, and they were supportive, which helped, but it still felt like this heavy cloud was hanging over me. Every day, I'd replay everything in my mind, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Could I have prevented this? Should I have been more cautious with my sister-in-law? Maybe not been so trusting? It's weird. Up until this mess, I'd always believed in being generous, especially with family. But now I couldn't help but question all of it. Had I been naive? Too willing to help? I'd always seen myself as a good guy, but I started to realize that sometimes being the good guy just makes you an easy target. About a week after the arrest, I got a call from a family friend who'd heard bits and pieces of what went down. She told me that my niece was staying in a temporary foster home, and I felt a pang of guilt I couldn't ignore. I knew she'd been manipulated, that her mom had put her in an impossible position, but that didn't erase the fact that she'd gone along with it. It's hard to look past that. Still, hearing that she was alone in a foster home hit me. No kid should have to go through that, even if they were part of something so messed up. Part of me wanted to reach out, to offer some kind of support. Maybe get in touch with her through CPS or see if there was a way I could check in. But every time I thought about it, I just felt this wall of anger go up again. I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Maybe one day, but right then, the wounds were too fresh. And besides, I wasn't even sure what good it would do. She needed time to process everything, to understand the consequences of her actions, and I needed time to heal. Update. It had been a few months since everything had gone down with my sister-in-law, and for the first time in a while, I was beginning to feel like things were stabilizing. I'd put a lot of distance between myself and the whole mess, and while I still felt betrayed, I was getting better at managing it, at not letting it control my every thought. Life was finally starting to feel normal again, or at least as normal as it could after something like that. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't pick up. I'd been dodging random numbers for a while, figuring they were either telemarketers or family members trying to stir things up. But something about this one made me answer. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "Hello, is this my name?" "Yeah," I replied, still a bit guarded. "Who's this?" "This is Sarah from Child Protective Services. We have your niece in our care and wanted to speak with you about a potential option." Hearing that, I felt a cold shock hit me, and I braced myself for whatever was coming next. She went on, explaining that my niece had been in temporary foster care since my sister-in-law's arrest. Apparently, they'd reached out to other family members, but either they hadn't met the criteria or weren't interested in taking her in. So here they were, giving me a call to see if I would consider temporary custody. I I don't know, I stammered, feeling a rush of emotions that I wasn't ready to face. "I'm not sure I'm the best option." Sarah was patient, letting me process everything. She explained that my niece's case was complicated, that she'd been through a lot with her mom, and that her environment hadn't exactly set her up for success. She sounded understanding, even sympathetic, like she knew how loaded this was for me. And maybe she did. She'd probably handled cases like this before. "Look," she said after a moment, "I'm not saying you have to decide right now. This is a difficult situation, and I understand there's been a lot of conflict. But as a family member, you'd have a chance to provide some stability for her, even if it's just temporary." I told her I'd think about it, and we agreed to talk again in a couple of days. When I hung up, I just sat there, staring at nothing, trying to wrap my head around it all. The idea of taking her in felt overwhelming. Part of me wanted to help her. She was just a kid, and she'd been through a mess of her own. But another part of me couldn't shake the hurt and betrayal of what she'd done, even if her mom had pressured her into it. The next couple of days were a whirlwind. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't really sleep either. The decision hung over me like a weight, making everything else feel insignificant. I kept going back and forth, trying to weigh the options. On one hand, she was still my niece. Despite everything that had happened, I'd watched her grow up. I remembered birthdays, holidays, the times I'd brought over gifts and groceries, knowing her mom was struggling to make ends meet. I'd cared about her as if she were my own daughter, and I couldn't deny that part of me still wanted to protect her, to make sure she had a shot at a decent life. I tried to convince myself that maybe, in the right environment, she'd have a chance to grow beyond what her mom had done. But on the other hand, I couldn't forget what she'd done. The accusation, the investigation, the sleepless nights and constant anxiety, the feeling of being on trial in my own life, the way she'd looked at me with that cold, rehearsed gaze, saying things that had nearly destroyed me. It was hard to see her as an innocent kid after that, no matter how much I told myself she'd been manipulated. Part of me knew she was just a pawn, that she'd done what she was told, but that didn't erase the damage. My friends had mixed opinions. Some told me it wasn't worth reopening that wound, that it would be too painful, too risky to bring her into my life after what had happened. Others said maybe it was an opportunity to make a difference, that if I took her in, I could be the positive influence she needed to turn things around. But none of them knew what it felt like to have your whole life threatened by someone you thought you could trust. None of them had been through that level of betrayal. Finally, I agreed to meet with her. CPS arranged a supervised visit at their office, and I showed up, nervous and unsure of what to expect. When I walked in, she was sitting there, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. Her eyes flicked up to mine, and for a second I saw a flash of fear, maybe even guilt. She mumbled a, "Hi," barely looking at me. I sat across from her, unsure what to say. She looked different, more closed off, almost guarded. It was like she'd built up walls around herself, walls I wasn't sure I could break through. But then, I realized I was doing the same thing. I was sitting there, my guard up, every instinct telling me to protect myself. I cleared my throat, trying to start the conversation. "How are you holding up?" It was all I could think to say. She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. It's okay, I guess. Different. There was a pause, and then she added, barely a whisper, I'm sorry. Hearing those words, I felt something tighten in my chest. I'd been waiting for an apology, hoping she'd own up to what had happened, but now that she'd said it, it felt hollow. Or maybe it was me that was hollow. I couldn't tell anymore. We sat there in silence, both of us awkward, unsure. When the visit ended, CPS asked if I'd come to a decision. I told them I needed a little more time, but on the drive home I realized I already knew my answer. I wanted to help her, I really did, but I also knew that having her in my life under my roof would be a constant reminder of everything I'd been through. I'd always wonder if I could trust her, if she was really sorry or just doing what she thought I wanted to hear, and that's no way to build a home. So a few days later, I called Sarah back and told her my decision. I wouldn't be taking her in. It wasn't an easy choice, and it definitely wasn't the one I'd imagined I'd ever have to make. But after everything, I needed to protect myself too. I hoped maybe that she'd find a place where she could learn from what had happened, where she could start fresh without the weight of her mom's mistakes hanging over her. It's hard to say goodbye to family, but sometimes you have to let go to move forward.
The video message from my daughter-in-law, Lena, landed like a slap to the face. There she was on the screen, perfectly made up, her blonde hair cascading over designer clothing, a fake smile plastered on her lips. "Hi, Marlene, Theo," she began in that sickly sweet tone. "I'm reaching out about Aiden's 5th birthday bash next month. It's a major milestone, so we want to make it extra special." Here it comes, I thought, exchanging a wary glance with Theo. Ever since Elliot married this Instagram beauty queen, her demands on us had only grown. "A little birdie told me you two were looking to get Aiden something amazing for his big day." Lena batted her fake eyelashes. "Well, I'm making it easy. Aiden would absolutely love a brand new swimming pool installed in our backyard." My jaw dropped. A pool? Those ran tens of thousands of dollars, even for a basic model. Nothing too fancy. Lena continued with a dismissive hair toss. "Just your standard issue resort-style in-ground pool with a pool house, hot tub, the whole 9 yards. You know how much Aiden loves swimming." She droned on with more details of her extravagant vision, but I'd stopped listening. This was absurd. After years of her entitled behavior, this felt like the final straw. "So let me know if you need any other details. But really, make it worthwhile or don't even bother showing up." Lena flashed one last grin before the video cut out. The silence hung heavy between Theo and me. "She can't be serious," I finally sputtered. Theo sighed, squeezing the bridge of his nose. "When is she not?" You know how Lena gets. I did know. Ever since Elliot brought this artificially sweet high-maintenance woman into our lives, she'd made increasingly outrageous demands under the guise of making memories for our grandson Aiden. Expensive Disney cruises, designer clothes, even a celebrity kiddie party planner for his 4th birthday bash. And Lena always spun it as being for Aiden, but anyone could see the real priority was herself and her influencer image. But this took things to another level. A fully decked-out pool just for a kid's birthday? It was obscene. "We can't," I said flatly. "Theo, we don't have that kind of money. Even if we scraped everything we had, there's no way." Tears pricked my eyes, a mix of anger, hurt and exasperation churning inside me. This was our family she was talking about, not one of her online audiences to impress. I could see the same emotions etched on Theo's face as he pulled me into a hug. For a long moment, we clung to each other, united against Lena's audacious demand. But Theo eventually pulled back, resignation in his eyes. Maybe we could look into something smaller," he said tentatively. "We both have been putting in extra hours at work, and there's my pension fund that'll be available soon." I stared at him, stunned he'd even entertained such lunacy. "You're not seriously considering this?" He shrugged helplessly. "It's for our grandson, Marlene. If doing this might help get Lena off our backs, keep Elliot and Aiden in our lives." His words trailed off, but I could hear the unspoken meaning loud and clear. If giving Lena what she demanded was the price for preserving our family, for keeping Elliot and Aiden from being completely poisoned by her distorted values. Reopening the wound she just inflicted, Lena's parting words echoed in my mind. "Make it worthwhile, or don't bother showing up." My heart ached at the thought of being cut off from my only grandchild over this. but I also couldn't fathom bankrupting ourselves for one of Lena's tantrums. Squaring my shoulders, I met Theo's worried gaze. No matter what it took, I wouldn't let this woman fracture our family. We had to find a way to make this right. The days blurred together after that bombshell from Lena. Every conversation, every interaction seemed to circle back to her outrageous pool demand. We could put a home equity loan on the house, Theo mused one night over dinner, just to cover the upfront costs. I nearly choked on my food. Are you insane? Go into debt over this? We're not made of money. He wilted under my glare. I'm just trying to think of options, honey. You know how Lena gets when she doesn't get her way. I slammed my fork down with more force than intended. So what? We just roll over for her every tantrum? Where does it end? The haunted look in Theo's eyes said it all. We both knew there was no endpoint with Lena, not unless one of us put our foot down. Still, the threat of being cut off from Elliot and Aiden loomed over us like a curse. In a way, that's exactly what Lena had become, a curse upon our family. The demands only escalated from there. Suddenly she was calling constantly, texting incessant updates about party planning she needed our input on. Her reasoning didn't even make sense half the time. She just wanted to soak up our energy and resources. One afternoon, I arrived home from the library to find Theo elbow-deep in sketches and spreadsheets. "What's all this?" I asked in bewilderment. Lena stopped by with one of her vision boards, he sighed, looking 20 years older. She had it all mapped out, the pool, the landscaping, even a pool house with its own kitchen and bar. You're kidding. I sank onto the couch, anger roiling in my gut. She brought this insanity into our home? She said this is the only way Aiden will be happy. Theo raked a hand through his thinning hair warily. That we're depriving him if we don't make his dream come true. My jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth. That's a bunch of crap. This is about her, not Aiden. I know. Theo turned back to the coffee table of binders and portfolios, misery etched in the slump of his shoulders. But maybe if we put in some reasonable requests, she'll settle for less. Or maybe she'll keep demanding more. I threw up my hands in frustration. Since when did we start going broke for that woman's ego? The shrill ring of Theo's phone cut off his reply. Lena's smiling face flashing on the screen. He shot me an apologetic look and answered, jaw tensing as she launched into another tirade. I watched him nod along like a beaten dog, offering feeble uh-huhs and we'll sees in response to her endless stream of wants. When he finally hung up 20 minutes later, I could no longer hold back my fury. I'm drawing the line, Theo. This is utter madness. Sagging back against the sofa, he looked utterly defeated. She threatened not to let us see Aiden if we don't give in, Marlene. What are we supposed to do? My heart twisted at the mere thought of losing our grandson, of Aiden being shaped and twisted by that woman's distorted values, without our stabilizing presence to guide him. It was a waking nightmare. But I also knew we couldn't keep indulging Lena's deranged spending and entitlement complex. It was a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. Someone had to put their foot down, even if it meant confronting the worst possible outcome. Meeting Theo's haunted gaze, I drew a steadying breath. We need a plan, one that finally puts this madness to bed without losing our family over it. His eyes widened briefly, then narrowed to cold steel. At last, we were on the same page. No more being manipulated, no more cowering to Lena's histrionics. For the sake of our grandchild, the kid glove treatment was officially over. Aiden's 5th birthday party was every bit the overblown spectacle Lena had threatened. Dozens of shrieking kids swarmed the backyard she'd decked out like a carnival midway. Balloon arches, a massive bounce house, even a live petting zoo dominated our modest suburban yard. Can you believe this madness? I muttered to Theo as we wove through the chaos, searching for our grandson. He grimaced, eyes bouncing from the whirring rides to the team of princessed-up party performers putting on a show. Try not to let it get to you today. We're here for Aiden, remember? Easy for him to say. My teeth ground with each new display of excess I took in. An entire hide worth of party food piled onto tables, an electric train ride blaring its caller through the neighborhood. All for one little boy's birthday. But Lena was the true ringmaster of this 3-ring circus. She flitted through the crowd in a designer sundress that cost more than my monthly mortgage, greeting guests with air kisses and fake laughs. Her social media friend posed beside her for countless staged photo ops. When she finally deigned to notice us, her sugary smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, if it isn't the party poopers, so glad you two could join." I opened my mouth, every biting remark I'd rehearsed rising to my tongue. But Theo squeezed my hand in warning. "We're happy to be here for Aiden's big day," he replied tightly. Yes, about that." Lena's eyes flicked across the yard, sweeping dismissively over the chaos surrounding us. "I must admit, I'm a little disappointed. I thought you two loved your grandson enough to go all out." I bristled at her condescending tone, taking in the insanity all around us. "You're kidding me, right? This spectacle is enough for 10 birthdays. Oh, honey, don't be so bourgeois." She patted my cheek in a way that made me want to slap it. "You know that's just how us influencers do things. Go big or go home, right?" The fake, tinkling laugh that followed made my blood boil. Bourgeois? She was the one blowing enough cash for a down payment on a house on this ridiculous circus. "Where's the gift, anyway?" She tapped one designer heel impatiently. "I gave you too ample time to make this a memorable bash for Aiden." "The gift?" Theo sputtered, shifting uncomfortably. "We didn't get the chance to really..." Don't tell me you punted on that, too." Lena's face contorted into a sneer, drawing looks from nearby guests. "See, this is exactly why I keep my expectations low for you two. So painfully pedestrian." That was the final straw. I jabbed a finger at the spectacle surrounding us, fury making me tremble. "Are you out of your mind? Look at all this. How could you possibly need or want anything more?" Ooh, someone's getting a little big for her britches. Lena ran her eyes over me with barely disguised contempt. I expected better than this pathetic display from my husband's parents. Truly disappointing. As her social circle began murmuring and leaning in, I saw red. "The only disappointment here is you, using Aiden as an excuse to bankrupt us over this gaudy..." "Mommy?" The small, timid voice caused the breath to catch in my throat. I turned to find Aiden himself standing there, party hat askew and confusion written on his cherubic features. "What's going on?" His wide eyes bounced between Lena and me. For a long, tense beat, the entire party seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for Lena's response. Then her features melted into an exaggerated pout, and she rushed to pull Aiden against her hip. "Oh, sweetie, your mean old grandma's just upset she couldn't get you that new pool you wanted." "Pool?" The poor kid looked even more bewildered. "Yes, for your birthday." Tears welled in Lena's eyes as she stroked his hair. "But she and Grandpa are just being selfish old grumps about giving you your present." Aiden's gaze bounced between Lena and us, innocent incomprehension melting into dismay. The sight twisted my heart into knots. Lena, as always, had spun a web of lies to paint herself as the hapless victim. "But I didn't want a pool," Aiden mumbled meekly. A hush fell over the entire yard as every eye turned toward Lena, awaiting her response. Her jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before she threw an arm around Aiden, sobbing dramatically. "Of course you didn't, sweetie." She locked eyes with me over his head, that vindictive smile back in place. "How could you want something so frivolous when you have such a thoughtful mom who's about to give you a baby sibling?" My heart plummeted somewhere into my shoes. As a new flood of cries and gasps filled the yard, surrounding us in a swell of shock, Lena just stared at me in cold triumph. In that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same. The fallout from Aiden's disastrous birthday bash was swift and absolute. In the days and weeks after Lena's conniving pregnancy reveal, a palpable rift formed in our family. Elliot, ever the doting husband, rallied behind his devious wife without question. "She's under a lot of stress and hormones right now," he protested whenever Theo or I tried reasoning with him. "We need to be supportive." Supportive? After the humiliating spectacle she made of us in front of all those people, over her ludicrous lies about wanting a pool for Aiden, the mere thought made my blood boil. But Elliot simply waved off our concerns, too besotted to see Lena's true colors. Instead, the two of them retreated further into their social media bubble, posting a deluge of videos and photo ops about her radiant pregnancy journey. Meanwhile, our access to our actual grandson continued dwindling at Lena's behest. Every attempt at a visit or outing was rebuffed with another flimsy excuse about her difficult pregnancy and need for rest. I tried pushing back, calling Elliot out on our unfair treatment. But he only grew more defensive. "Why can't you be happy for us?" he snapped during one tense exchange after I insisted on having Aiden over for Theo's birthday. I threw up my hands in disgust. "Of course we're happy you're having another child, but this goes far beyond that, and you know it." Elliot's jaw tightened mulishly. "No, I don't know that. All I see are my parents acting jealous and bitter about our growing family." The hurtful accusation struck deep, rendering me momentarily speechless. How could my own son be so blind to the manipulation swirling around him? I stalked off before I said something I'd regret, fighting back angry tears. In the den, I found Theo watching the latest Lena video with a pained expression. "Did you see this garbage?" I scoffed, gesturing at the screen where Lena cooed about her pregnancy glow and upcoming nursery design. "She's airing all our dirty laundry for clicks." Theo shook his head slowly. "Not just that. Check out the comments." A quick skim revealed a distressing number of replies bashing us, calling us cruel and unsupportive, all based on the twisted story Lena was peddling about her humble family. Clicking off the video in disgust, I sank into the sofa beside Theo. I don't know how much more of this I can take. He draped a comforting arm around my shoulders, the wariness in his eyes mirroring my own. We knew there'd be backlash for standing up to Lena. She's not going to let this slide. So we're just supposed to sit back while she smears us in public, cuts us off from our own grandchild over her petty schemes? Tears of frustration stung my eyes. Of course not, but we need to be smart about our next move. As if on cue, Theo's phone chimed with a new text notification. Something in his expression shifted as he read the message. "What is it?" I asked warily. He held the phone out, letting me read the message from an unknown number. "Evidence against Lena. Seeing you suffer kills me, but I can help. Attached are files on her real spending priorities. No need to thank me. I'll remain anonymous. Do what you must." My breath caught as I scrolled through the suspicious attachments. Bank statements detailing massive sums of money, photographs appearing to show Lena out partying and gallivanting while Aiden was off-screen. Could this be legitimate? "Who's this from?" I asked in a hushed voice, dread and a sliver of hope warring within me. Theo shook his head, lips set in a grim line. "No idea. But whoever they are, they just handed us the key to bringing Lena down once and for all." My heart stuttered at the thought, at finally being able to strike back at her manipulative lies and power plays, to save Aiden from her toxic influence. But to do so could risk severing our family ties for good. Elliot would surely take Lena's side, blinded by her false narratives. Theo must have seen the turmoil playing out on my face, because he squeezed my hand fiercely, leaning until our eyes met. "This may be our only chance, Marlene, our best shot at getting Aiden away from her poisonous influence, by any means necessary." The words hung heavy in the air, their implication clear. This was it, our point of no return that would alter the course of our family forever. No matter how it played out in the aftermath, we couldn't back down from this make-or-break moment. Not if it meant protecting Aiden's future. With a shuddering exhale, I nodded to Theo. Time to stop walking on eggshells around Lena once and for all. Time to fight back. After the damning evidence from our anonymous source, Theo and I wasted no time springing into action against Lena. We began compiling every scrap of proof we could find, racking our brains for past incidents and manipulations she'd pulled over the years. With my background as a librarian, I focused on conducting meticulous online research, while Theo tapped his network of colleagues and parents at the high school for any whispers about Lena's unscrupulous behavior. No stone was left unturned in our quest to expose her web of lies. "Did you know the Hensons cut ties with Lena after their son's birthday party last year?" Theo told me one evening over coffee, eyes bright with vindication. I raised my eyebrows. "No, I didn't. What happened?" "Apparently she hosted this overblown princess bash for their daughter, then badmouthed them on social media for being cheap with their gift." Theo shook his head in disgust. "Jane said Lena has an entire hate folder on her phone, with screenshots of messages going back months." My blood boiled at the thought of more innocent families being dragged through the mud by that wretched snake. "I want copies of everything. We're blowing this whole farce wide open." Theo nodded grimly, determination etched into every line of his weathered face. For too long, we'd suffered in silence, taking Lena's abuse in misguided hopes of protecting our family. But now, armed with the truth and a growing arsenal of evidence, we were going to make her pay for her manipulation, one way or another. And I refused to let Aiden remain trapped in her toxic orbit any longer. The plan took shape over hushed discussions at our kitchen table, fueled by righteous indignation and the occasional glass of wine to steady our nerves. After raising our finances on tight budgets for so long, even the idea of striking back at Lena carried immense risk. But seeing the despicable way she'd used and discarded other families for her own gratification, her callous treatment of Aiden, it all hardened our resolve. This was about more than just settling a personal vendetta. What if we started an anonymous website? I proposed one night, tapping my pencil restlessly against my notepad. A landing spot to release all the evidence to the public without directly confronting her. Theo frowned, rubbing his chin. Isn't that a bit passive, though? You know Lena, she'll just spin it as more hater attacks and bury the truth with her own propaganda blitz. Maybe? I worried my lip, then my eyes drifted to the teetering pile of manila folders brimming with damning documents. Or maybe we go straight to the source. He lifted one bushy eyebrow. You want to slip this all to Elliot? I shrugged, nerves fluttering in my belly. It's a risk, sure, but at this point, a direct intervention might be our only hope of finally breaking through to him and the truth. The thought of turning our own son against his wife, no matter how vile she'd proven to be, made my stomach churn. But I couldn't shake the memory of his haunted, oblivious expression at Aiden's party as Lena spun her web, too blinded by her manipulation to see the toxic reality. Releasing all our gathered evidence in one fell swoop, overwhelming him with proof of her true nature. It could be the wake-up call Elliot so desperately needed to escape her grasp. Theo sighed heavily, reaching across to squeeze my hand. It's a bold move, and if Elliot warns Lena first, then all bets are off, I finished quietly. We both knew that in Lena's hands the documents spelling out her misdeeds could vanish like smoke, smothered by her relentless spin and lies. Not to mention any fallout or vindictive vengeance she'd gleefully unleash on us all. But what other choice did we have? Sitting idly by had allowed her toxic web to spread unchecked this far. If we wanted any hope of saving Aiden from that poisonous environment, of protecting the rest of our family from her malice, we had to take one final, daring swing at the heart of her vile empire. Meeting Theo's steadfast gaze across the table, I saw the same conviction burning behind his eyes. No matter the risk, we couldn't let this insanity drag on any longer. Not while an innocent child's future hung in the balance. After all, that's what family was for, shielding our loved ones from those who wished to do them harm. And God help anyone who threatened a single hair on Aiden's head. With a grim nod, I reached for another file, and the planning began anew. One way or another, we'd bring Lena's house of lies crashing down around her, even if it meant raising our own family to the studs in the process. It was time. After weeks of meticulous planning and gathering evidence, Theo and I were ready to execute our gambit against Lena. The night before, we'd uploaded a comprehensive file dump to an anonymous web server, a digital dossier containing every scrap of proof we'd uncovered about Lena's neglect, manipulation, and wasteful spending. Incriminating bank statements, logged social media activity, even testimonies from others she'd mistreated over the years. All of it packaged together in one tidy bundle, waiting for our final keystrokes to release it upon the world. We planned to send the upload link directly to Elliot first, hoping the shock of the revelations would finally break whatever spell Lena had him under. But we also arranged for the files to automatically broadcast across multiple social platforms an hour later, ensuring widespread dispersal no matter how Lena tried to bury it. As the appointed hour ticked closer, my stomach twisted with nervous dread. This was it, our chance to protect Aiden and blow Lena's sham life apart for good. But the implications for the rest of our family... You ready for this? Theo's gruff voice pulled me from my whirling thoughts. He reached across the table to grasp my clammy hand, his own slightly trembling. We both knew there was no going back after this. I could only manage a tight nod, drawing a steadying breath. As I'll ever be. Theo's eyes crinkled at the corners with grim resignation, Then he turned toward the laptop between us. My heart kicked into overdrive as his finger hovered over the trackpad. "For Aiden," he murmured. "Our personal code for stealing our nerves these past few weeks." Another nod from me. "For Aiden." And with that, he struck the upload key. Lena's exposure officially began. The file pinged to Elliot's inbox first, accompanied by a brief message. "Open me, and you'll finally see the truth about your wife." I felt sick watching the progress bar crawl as the massive data dump transferred over. Every second dragged out like a Russian novel, each percentage increase seeming to taunt us with the damage we were about to unleash. How would Elliot react to this bombshell revelation about the woman he'd married? Would he immediately dismiss it as our bitter meddling? Or would the sheer enormity of evidence finally pierce whatever veil Lena had draped over his eyes? Most importantly, how vicious would Lena's retaliation be once she caught wind of our actions? A part of me was tempted to call the whole thing off, to snatch back this Pandora's box before its contents could contaminate our lives forever. But another insistent part, the one blazing with righteous fury over Lena's cruelty to Aiden, knew we'd finally crossed the Rubicon. There could be no half measures or surrender now, only scorched earth in the wake of our campaign. Suddenly, an alert box startled me from my daze. Transfer complete. The uploaded documents began ricocheting around the internet a second later, a widening digital diaspora every bit as uncontrollable as a raging bushfire. Within that first minute, a video compilation of Lena's greatest con hits began autoplaying on her own Instagram page, overlaying her palatial home videos with audio snippets of her vicious comments about Aiden and our family. Her comment sections, Twitter feeds, every social platform began melting down with a similar deluge of shocking evidence. Bank statements laid bare, archived posts and videos of her neglecting Aiden while living it up, personal messages mapping the intricate deceptions she'd spun. The bombardment was overwhelming, a digital tsunami crashing hard against the carefully curated facade she'd constructed over the years. And that was just the opening salvo in our counterstrike. Beside me, Theo let out a shuddering breath, half tension blowing off, half dawning realization of what we'd just set into motion. We watched the rapidly proliferating files ricochet across the web and across our community like a firestorm, the enormity of our actions finally striking home. Within the hour, news stations would pick up the story. Then the national outlets and celebrity bloggers. And at the center would be our ground zero blast. A stark glimpse into the trauma and manipulation Lena had inflicted upon our family over these past years. It was finally too late to stop the shockwave. Our truth offensive had come for the house of Lena, and nothing would be left unscathed in its wake, not even our own family. The fallout from our cyber bombardment against Lena hit like a hurricane. Within hours, her immaculate online kingdom had been reduced to a smoking crater of shattered illusions and exposed lies. Social media ran rampant with screenshots, videos, and a gleeful dissection of every incriminating scrap of evidence we'd uncovered. Overnight, Lena went from influencer icon to radioactive pariah as her brands and sponsors began jumping ship in droves. As for me and Theo, we could only watch in a strange detachment as the firestorm raged, alternating between grim satisfaction and creeping dread over what this metamorphosis would mean for our family. We hadn't heard a peep from Elliot since uploading the files, leaving us to theorize in anxious silence over how deeply the revelations about his wife had shaken him. Would he emerge from the wreckage still defiantly loyal to Lena's lies? Or had our brutal truth offensive finally broken her spell over him? The answer came just after dawn, in a flurry of tense knocks at the door. Thank God. Theo exhaled in a ragged whisper when we saw Elliot's haggard face through the peephole. He ushered him inside, shooting me a worried glance. "Son, what's going on? We've been sick with—" The words died on his lips as Elliot staggered forward, eyes hollow and brimming with barely contained rage. I flinched, half expecting him to lash out at the source of this cataclysm. But then, with an anguished cry, he simply crumpled against Theo, shaking with suppressed sobs. Exchanging a wordless look with Theo, I moved to steady Elliot as he began to keen in harsh, gulping gasps, like a dam finally shattering deep within. "I'm sorry," he choked between ragged breaths. "God, I'm so sorry." My throat thickened at the sheer brokenness lacing his voice. After so many months of self-inflicted isolation at Lena's whim, seeing my own son return to us in such a state felt like a shard of ice piercing my heart. Eventually his sobs tapered enough for speech. "You were right about her. All this time you were right. Every vile thing she did to you, to Aiden." Another wave of anguish racked him, and he squeezed his eyes shut, burying his face in Theo's shoulder like a lost child. I exchanged a haunted look with my husband, words unspoken between us. We'd shattered her deceptions, yes, but at what cost to our son? Those messages, the videos. I can't believe I let it go on for so long. How I could be so blind. Hey, it's okay," Theo murmured gruffly, hands rubbing soothing circles on Elliot's back. "That's what she did, son. Manipulated you into her web, we get it." The harrowed look in his eyes said otherwise, that some part of us would never forgive ourselves for failing to extract Elliot sooner. But for now, simply cradling our child against the aftermath seemed more important. When his ragged breathing finally evened out, Elliot pulled back, eyes rimmed and face haggard. "I kicked her out last night, took Aiden and left after seeing everything." He gestured vaguely, then seemed to deflate all over again. "God, how could I let Hervis get so twisted? To put Aiden through all that?" I bit back a scathing remark about putting a stop to her antics sooner. My anger could keep for another day. Right now, my son needed comfort and a safe harbor to process this traumatic reckoning. So I simply held his gaze and nodded, hoping he could read the understanding there, and the promise that her reign of terror was over. Elliot's shoulders slumped, weariness crashing over him as the last vestiges of life before crumbled away. Leaning into Theo again, he squeezed his eyes shut. "I don't know what I'd do without you both. After everything she put us through." The raw gratitude in his gravelly murmur was like a balm against all the suffering we'd endured this past year. Not that the road ahead would be easy. Lena would surely retaliate against this devastation in whatever ways she could. But in that moment, with our family united against her at long last, I felt a surge of defiance toward whatever vindictive storm still loomed ahead. She'd struck the first blows, set the rules of this scorched earth campaign. Now it was her turn to reap the whirlwind we'd sown. My eyes met Theo's over Elliot's bowed head. A silent vow passed between us, to ensure Lena never regained a foothold in our lives again. Not after this razing to the bedrock. Aiden's future and our family's well-being would remain secure, no matter how much we had to sacrifice to keep the she-wolf away. In the aftermath of our brutal takedown, the shockwaves rippled through every facet of our lives. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a sense of hope threaded through the upheaval. With Lena banished from our household, Elliot and Aiden took up semi-permanent residence in our spare bedroom as they worked to rebuild their lives from the wreckage she'd left behind. Watching my grandson set Phi into a routine free from her toxic influence was like a soothing balm after so much turmoil. Of course, Lena didn't slink off into oblivion quietly. Her initial defiance at the revelations morphed into a spiraling crusade of denials, threats, and attempts to regain control of the narrative. "She's claiming we fabricated everything," Elliot told us one night at the dinner table, jaw clenched in barely contained fury. "There's a new video saying we conspired against our own family out of jealousy." Theo grunted in disgust while I fought the urge to hurl my plate across the room. Even disgraced and dejected, that vile woman couldn't help lashing out like a cornered viper. "Let her squirm," I spat, locking eyes with my son. "The truth is finally out there, loud and clear for anyone who matters to see." "You're right." Some of the tension drained from Elliot's shoulders with an exhausted slump. In that moment, he seemed to age years in a matter of seconds. "Hell, it's all I can do not to put even more of her dirty laundry on blast right now." Despite the anger still simmering under his words, just having him back under our roof was like a weight lifted. Being able to see Aiden grow and play outside Lena's malign influence made every hardship worthwhile. Sure, she continued sniping and lobbing hateful allegations from her dwindling circle of sycophants. But without her manicured illusions to prop it up, the bluster rang increasingly hollow. While our family unit steadily regained its bearings and sense of purpose, the recharged bonds between Theo, me, and our boys were a constant through the transition. But nowhere was that bond more evident than in our renewed focus on Aiden's well-being. Having him around constantly, free from Lena's manipulation, revealed just how much she'd warped the sweet, innocent boy in her quest for notoriety. "Grandma, why didn't you like my party last time?" he asked me one sunny afternoon while blowing bubbles on the back patio. My gut twisted at the remembered humiliation, but when I glanced over at Aiden's cherubic features, so full of pure childhood curiosity, the truth came easily. "You know something, sweetheart? That whole big party, it wasn't really for you at all." I tickled his belly, earning a peal of giggles. "Your mommy just wanted to show off for her friends, not make you feel special." Aiden's tiny brow furrowed in confusion. "But I thought we were posed to have fun?" Leave it to the heartbreakingly earnest perspective of a child to cut straight through to the core truth. Smiling, I pulled him onto my lap and nuzzled his soft hair. "Of course we are, my little guy, and this time, I promise it's just going to be about us having fun together. No big fuss or showing off, okay?" My throat thickened as I drank in his radiant smile. "Because you're all the fun this old grandma needs." When his arms tightened around me in a fierce hug, I shot a look toward the patio door. Elliot and Theo were watching the tender scene, fondness and relief written across their faces. In that moment, with my family whole again and Lena's toxic presence banished, I felt as light and carefree as the bubbles drifting on the breeze, like awakening from a long, twisted nightmare finally behind us. Our war against Lena's malice had been brutal, with casualties strewn across both sides. But as I held my grandson close, savoring his unbridled joy, the battleground seemed a small price to pay. When Aiden's next milestone birthday arrived a few months later, we threw a small but rowdy bash in the backyard, a jumble of balloons, cheap pizza, and delighted shrieks, as he tore through stack after stack of gifts showered on him by his adoring clan. No obscene overindulgences or camera crews, no vapid social media performances. Just the unconditional warmth and love of an extended family reveling in our reconnection. As I watched Theo gamely endure another round of the mechanized dancing robot Aiden had cajoled him into, my heart swelled with a sense of gratitude. For persevering through the darkest days and emerging victorious. For regaining the family I'd feared was lost forever to Lena's poisoned webs. Most of all, for ensuring my sweet grandson's bright future would remain unshackled by that vile woman's lust for attention at any cost. When Aiden came barreling over to demand another turn on the robot, Theo shot me a wink and an exaggerated grimace over the boy's head. A silent acknowledgement of how far we'd come to reclaim these simple family moments. Pulling them both close, I couldn't hide my radiant smile as the sounds of laughter and revelry swirled around us. Our family's new beginning had finally arrived. "Megan, it's strange, isn't it? Everyone kept saying how perfect our life is, yet here I am, questioning everything about it," I said, staring blankly at the dinner table, absent-mindedly fidgeting with my wedding ring. David looked up from his phone, a hint of irritation in his eyes. "Megan, not tonight. I'm exhausted. Can we just have one peaceful dinner?" I nodded, biting my tongue. Another evening, another conversation cut short. This had become our routine, silences filled with unspoken emotions. As I cleared the table, my phone buzzed. "Mrs. Carter, there's been an accident. Your husband and his passenger are in critical condition," the voice on the other end informed. The plate slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. "What? Where? How bad is it?" My voice was frantic. "Calm down. They're being taken to Mercy General. Come quickly," the caller said before hanging up abruptly. I grabbed my coat and rushed out, my mind racing. In the emergency room, I was met by a police officer. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked, his face somber. "Your husband and his passenger were involved in a car accident. They're both in surgery." "His passenger?" I whispered, trying to process. "Who was with him?" The officer hesitated. "I believe her name is Samantha Foster." My heart sank. Samantha, my sister? What were they doing together? I spotted my mom, June, entering the waiting room. "Megan, what's happening?" "I heard about the accident. Samantha. Where is she?" "Mom, I don't know. They told me she's in surgery with David," I said, barely holding back my tears. 2 hours later, a doctor approached us. "Mrs. Carter, Mrs. Foster, your husband and daughter made it through surgery. They'll live, but their conditions are serious. It'll be a long road to recovery." Relief mixed with confusion filled me. Why was Samantha in David's car? I looked at my mom, searching for answers, but she looked as puzzled as I felt. Days turned into a blur. Between hospital visits and sleepless nights, questions gnawed at me, but I pushed them aside, focusing on David's and Samantha's recovery. Though frail, David managed to speak. "Megan, it wasn't my fault. You have to believe me." I nodded, but the doubt lingered. Why were they together that day? One evening, as I sat beside David's bed, Samantha's voice whispered from her room. "I'm sorry, Megan. I never meant for this to happen." "Sorry for what? What were you doing with David?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. Samantha averted her eyes. "Helping with the apartment. You had to work, remember?" "That doesn't explain everything, Samantha," I said, feeling my frustration bubble over. Before she could answer, the officer from earlier approached. "Mrs. Carter, we need to talk. It seems there's more to the accident. We've found evidence suggesting tampering with your car's brakes." "How is tampering?" My knees felt weak. Who would do such a thing? "We're investigating, but it might be someone close to you," he said, looking directly at me. My mind raced. Who could it be? How could this happen to us? In that moment, I realized the illusion of our perfect life had shattered, just like the plate that fell from my hand that night. The days ahead would test me in ways I never imagined. The day of our planned shopping trip with Samantha dawned earlier than expected. I was getting ready when my boss called. "Megan, I need you to come into the office. It's urgent," he said, his voice strained. I glanced at my watch. "But today is—" "I know, Megan, but it can't wait," he interrupted, sounding desperate. I sighed, feeling the pressure mount. I had promised Samantha this day. Running my fingers through my hair, I went to find David. "David, I'm so sorry, but I have to go into work. Can you help Samantha with the furniture shopping today?" I asked, feeling guilty. David's face softened despite the usual strain between us. "Sure, Megan, I can do that. Are you okay?" "Yeah, just stressed. Thanks, David. I'll be back as soon as I can." I hurried out, catching the first bus to the office. The day was a blur of meetings and emergencies, all while my mind kept drifting to Samantha and David. Late in the afternoon, my phone rang. An unknown number flashed on the screen. I answered, my heart sinking immediately. "Mrs. Carter, I regret to inform you, I heard nothing else." My entire world flipped upside down. As the unknown caller continued speaking, I held on to the edge of my desk, feeling the room spin. I rushed out of the office and sped to the hospital, my thoughts racing almost as fast. The echoes of the previous night's revelations kept haunting me. In the waiting room, I saw the same police officer who had become a grim fixture in our lives. His presence hinted at how dire the situation was. "Officer, what's happening? Is it my husband and sister again?" I asked, breathless. "Yes, Mrs. Carter. Their conditions are still critical, but we have some suspicions regarding this incident too," his tone grave. "What do you mean?" My voice shook. "We think someone tampered with their car," he said, studying my reaction. "This couldn't be happening." "Sabotage again?" I glanced to see my mom, June, rushing in. "Megan, what's going on?" "Samantha and David—" "Mom, it's bad. The police think someone tampered with their car," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother gasped, clutching my arm. Who would do such a thing? "That's what we need to find out," the officer said. "We need to investigate, but it's looking like someone close to you is involved." As we waited, my emotions whirled. David was supposed to help Samantha, but now they both lay fighting for their lives. In the sterile halls of the hospital, the doctor emerged again. "Mrs. Carter, Mrs. Foster, they'll make it through surgery, but their conditions remain serious. It'll be a hard recovery." Everything felt like a nightmare come to life. As I struggled to process this, a chilling thought crossed my mind. Who would do this, and why target David and Samantha? David was conscious again later, still weak but coherent. "Megan," he croaked, reaching out for my hand. "It wasn't my fault." I sat by his bed, trying to piece everything together. The same questions replayed. Why were they in the car together? Why did this keep happening? Then, like a shadow cutting through the dim light, another question loomed. Was someone deliberately trying to tear us apart? The pieces didn't fit, and the answers kept slipping through my fingers. The days ahead would reveal more than just the extent of their injuries. They would expose the darkest corners of our lives, corners I wasn't ready to face. I gripped the steering wheel, driving to the hospital with a white-knuckled intensity. The news of the accident played on repeat in my mind. David and Samantha. Why did this keep happening? The hospital loomed large as I pulled into the parking lot. I stumbled through the entrance, my breaths coming in shallow gasps. The familiar sterile smell hit me like a wave. I rushed to the receptionist. "David Carter and Samantha Foster, please. Where are they?" "They're on the 3rd floor, ICU," she responded, eyes filled with empathy. Racing to the elevator, I barely noticed the others around me. Every second felt like an eternity. As the doors opened on the 3rd floor, I spotted the police officer from earlier, waiting with a grim expression. "Mrs. Carter, let's talk," he said, leading me to a small, quiet room. "What happened?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Preliminary evidence suggests someone tampered with the brakes on your car," he began. "We're investigating, but we need to address some initial suspicions." I looked at him in disbelief. "Who could have done this?" "We don't know yet, but it might be someone very close to you," he said, holding my gaze. The room spun as I tried to comprehend his words. Someone close to me? Who would do such a thing? Just then the doctor entered. "Mrs. Carter, you and your mother can see them now, but they're still very weak. Please, just a few minutes." We followed him silently to the ICU. I walked in, feeling like a ghost. David lay motionless, tubes and machines everywhere. His eyes fluttered open as I approached. "Megan," he whispered, his voice strained. I'm sorry." "David, don't try to talk," I said, a lump in my throat. "We'll figure this out." I moved to Samantha's side, her face pale and battered. She slowly opened her eyes, looking at me with a flicker of guilt. "I'm so sorry, Megan. I never wanted this," she mumbled, tears welling up. "Why, Sam? Why were you with David?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Before she could reply, the officer stepped in. "Mrs. Carter, we have more questions for you. We suspect there might be something deeper going on." He led me out of the room as my mind raced with a flurry of questions. "What do you mean by something deeper?" I asked, trying to keep up. "We're looking at this from all angles. Right now, our focus is on who had access to your car and why they'd target both David and Samantha," he explained, his tone serious. I nodded, absorbing the weight of his words. Someone had it out for my family, and as the picture started to come into focus, I realized I needed to be strong to face whatever truths came our way. Back in the waiting area, June wrapped her arms around me. "Megan, we'll get through this. We have to." Her words offered a small glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. As I sat there, I knew the days ahead would be filled with difficult revelations and harder choices, but one thing was clear. I wouldn't stop until I uncovered the truth. And whoever was behind this, they'd pay for every bit of pain they caused. The hospital became my second home in the weeks that followed. David and Samantha were awake but far from okay. Their recoveries were slow, and with each day, our family splintered further. David's frustration grew, seeping into every interaction. One evening, as I entered his room, I found him seething. "Megan, this is unbearable," he snapped. "Why can't you do anything right? Get the nurses, now." I flinched at his harsh tone, but nodded and stepped out. While I sought the nurses, a knot tightened in my stomach. Returning with a nurse, David glared at me. "It took you long enough," he muttered. Embarrassed and hurt, I took a step back, letting the nurse do her job. Walking out, I heard Samantha calling for me. I headed into her room, already bracing for the stress. "Megan, can you help me with this bed adjustment? Why is everything so hard to reach?" she complained, sounding almost whiny. I adjusted the bed, trying to keep a steady hand. "There you go, better?" "Yeah, thanks. Just, don't you get tired of this?" she asked, her voice softer, almost reflective. I sighed, wiping a hand across my forehead. "It's exhausting, Sam, but it's what we have to do." She looked away, silent, and for a moment I thought through the shadows of her guilt. But I couldn't afford to delve into their thoughts. Actions mattered now. Moments later, June joined me in the hallway. She looked worn out, dark circles under her eyes. "Megan, dear, this is too much. You need rest." "I can't, Mom. They need me," I argued, though my body ached with fatigue. As I turned to leave, I caught a snippet of conversation that chilled me. "Damn it, Samantha, how could you trust anyone else to handle this mess?" David's voice accused from his room. "I thought we'd be smart enough to avoid this," Samantha retorted, her voice dripping with exasperation. Their words hung in the air as I stepped back, unnoticed. Everywhere I turned, betrayal seemed to lurk. Later that evening, The officer returned with an update. Mrs. Carter, we confirmed that your car's brakes were tampered with. It appears meticulous. A lump formed in my throat. Do you have any leads? We're following up on some information, but nothing concrete yet. It seems very personal, he added. I nodded, feeling the weight of new suspicion. Each discovery pushed me closer to an edge I couldn't ignore. Back in Samantha's room, I watched as she rested fitfully. Her condition was serious, and her needs were endless. But as I cared for her, the tension between us lingered just below the surface. David, on the other hand, became increasingly venomous. Megan, this is your fault, isn't it? He'd accuse, his bitterness slicing through the thin air of the hospital room. You always wanted something more. Well, look where that got us. I clenched my jaw, swallowing down my retorts. Silence became my shield. As days dragged on, June was caught between us, her own exhaustion growing. The strain in David and Samantha's behavior took a toll on her, and it showed. In the quiet moments, when the hospital felt heavy with unspoken words, I knew I had to stay resilient. This darkness, whatever it held, would not swallow me whole. The truth, however twisted, was my next goal, and in that journey, my quiet determination was my solitary companion. June sat next to me in the waiting room, her face pale from the persistent strain. Mom, you should go home. Rest, I said, squeezing her hand. She shook her head. No, Megan, I need to be here for both of you. A police officer approached, his expression serious. Mrs. Carter, can we speak privately? I nodded and followed him to a small room. The door closed behind us, magnifying the silence. We've found more evidence, he began, eyes locking onto mine. The brake tampering points to someone close to you. Further investigation led us to Maxine Lewis. Do you know her? My heart skipped a beat. Maxine? No, I don't think so. She has a strong vendetta against David, he explained. It seems they have a history. I had never heard of her before, but my gut twisted. What kind of history? We're still piecing it together, but she's someone you should be aware of, he said, his tone firm. We'll keep you updated. Back in David's room, I tried to mask my turmoil. He lay there, eyes closed, looking fragile. When his eyes opened, the familiar coldness was there. David, do you know a Maxine Lewis? I asked, my voice steady. He blinked, showing confusion for the first time. Maxine? Why are you asking about her? She's connected to the brake tampering, I said, watching his reaction closely. David's face darkened. Don't believe everything they say. Megan, she's just a liar trying to ruin me. A chilling realization set in. His words sounded defensive rather than innocent. I took a step back, needing to breathe. Later, as I moved through the hospital, I saw Samantha's demands growing. Mom, I need this. I need that, she whined, pushing June to exhaustion. With June physically drained and emotionally wrecked, the hospital turned into a battleground. I saw the toll it took on her, breaking my heart. One evening, as I huddled in the courtyard for a moment of solitude, I heard hushed voices. Peeking through the window, I saw David on the phone. You need to fix this, Samantha. We can't let Megan find out. David's voice was stern. Samantha replied, her voice shaky, I thought we covered all our tracks. How did they find Maxine? David glanced around, then hissed, She's relentless. We need to deal with her before she exposes everything. Their words sent a shiver down my spine. My suspicions solidified into a horrifying reality. They were in on something deep, something dark. Determined to get the truth, I confronted Samantha the next morning. Sam, what's going on between you and David? I demanded. Her eyes widened, fear and guilt mingling. Megan, you don't understand. Help me understand then, I said, my voice cracking but forceful. Before she could respond, the same officer reappeared. Mrs. Carter, we've confirmed some findings. Maxine Lewis has a significant grievance with your husband related to financial deceit and personal betrayal. I stood there, my world crumbling as the pieces came together. David and Samantha had lies stretching far and wide, and now Maxine's quest for revenge had entwined us all. Leaving the hospital that night, my resolve hardened. The darkness needed to come to light. But first, I'd have to face both David and Samantha, expose their deceit, and deliver justice for everyone hurt along the way. The truth was no longer hiding, it was marching right towards us. With every step, I knew I was getting closer to unraveling the entire conspiracy, and I swore to myself nobody would walk away unscathed once the truth surfaced. The days passed in a blur, each one blending into the next. My focus sharpened. I had to confront David and Samantha. The lies needed to end. One morning, I stood outside David's hospital room summoning the courage to go in. When I finally walked in, his eyes flicked up from his phone. "Megan, what now?" he asked, annoyance clear in his voice. "I know about Maxine. I know about the tampered brakes. You need to tell me everything," I demanded, crossing my arms. David's expression shifted, a sneer curling his lips. "You think you know everything, huh? You know nothing, Megan." "No more lies, David. Why was Samantha with you?" I pressed, feeling my anger surge. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Samantha and I are closer than you think. We've been together behind your back for months." No, I felt the ground give way beneath me. "What?" I whispered, barely able to breathe. David's eyes gleamed with malice. "Yeah, Megan. While you were busy playing the doting wife, Samantha and I were planning a future. One that didn't involve you." My heart pounded in my chest. "You used me?" "Of course," David said, his voice dripping with contempt. "We needed your money, your connections. It was all a game." With shaking hands, I left his room and stumbled into Samantha's. She looked up, guilt and fear etched into her face. "Megan, she started, but I cut her off. "Spare me the excuses, Sam. I know. David told me everything." She broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I shouted, rage boiling over. "You betrayed me, sabotaged my life." Samantha sobbed, unable to meet my eyes. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. We just wanted to push you out of the way, take control." I clenched my fists, shaking with anger. "You wanted to destroy me. Why? Because you were jealous? Because you and David wanted my life?" Suddenly a nurse walked in, startled by the intensity in the room. "Is everything okay here?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "No, it's not, but it will be." I left the room, resolved to take action. The first step was meeting with the officer. "Mrs. Carter, we have more to show you," he said, leading me to a small office. The screen flickered to life, showing surveillance footage from my car. There were David and Samantha, laughing, touching. The evidence was undeniable. Tears filled my eyes as I watched my trust shatter. "Megan," the officer's voice was gentle, "we can pursue charges. Their manipulation of your finances, the attempted murder, it's all documented." Stunned, I nodded. "Do what you need to do." Later, at home, I found a message from Maxine. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "David destroyed my life. I needed him to pay. I never meant for you to be hurt, Megan." Maxine's pain mirrored my own, a twisted kinship formed through betrayal. Her story, one of deceit and revenge, echoed in mine. The next day, I returned to the hospital with divorce papers. David's eyes widened when he saw them. "Megan, wait. We can work this out," he pleaded, a hint of desperation in his voice. "It's over, David," I said coldly, dropping the papers on his bed. "You took everything from me. Now you'll pay." Walking away, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. Samantha's screams echoed behind me, but I didn't turn back. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was stronger now. The truth, bitter and painful, had set me free. And with that freedom came the resolve to rebuild, to rise from the ashes of betrayal. David tried to stop me as I walked out of his hospital room, but I did not turn back. His pleas faded as I moved down the corridor, my steps growing firmer with each stride. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. The next few days were a whirlwind. News of David's and Samantha's affair spread like wildfire. Friends, colleagues, and even family members reached out, shocked and judgmental. I let them talk, their words bouncing off my new armor. One afternoon, I walked into a cafe for a meeting with the police officer. The place was buzzing, but I felt a strange calm wash over me. "Mrs. Carter," the officer greeted with a nod. "We have finalized the charges against David and Samantha. They'll be facing a lengthy legal battle." "Good," I replied, my voice steady. "I want justice, not just for me, but for everyone they hurt." He slid a document across the table. "This outlines their financial manipulations and the evidence we've gathered. Their social standing is already in ruins." I scanned the paper, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. It was all there in black and white, every deceitful act laid bare. Leaving the cafe, I bumped into Maxine. Her face was a mask of regret. "Megan," she began softly, "I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted David to feel the pain he caused me." I studied her, seeing the echoes of my own pain. "Maxine, you took extreme measures, but I understand why," I said, surprising myself with the empathy in my voice. We both suffered because of him. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. I'm sorry for everything. With a heavy heart, I walked away, my mind set on the next step. My journey was far from over. The legal proceedings against David and Samantha progressed quickly. Each court appearance was another blow to their fabricated lives. Their faces, once haughty and assured, now looked haunted. One morning, I stood outside the courthouse, clutching my mother's hand. June looked weary but resolute. Megan, I'm so proud of you. You've been so strong. I smiled faintly. I had to be for both of us. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. When David and Samantha entered, all eyes turned to them. They looked diminished, mere shadows of their former selves. David's lawyer stood first. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty. The judge's gaze was stern. The evidence is overwhelming. I hope you're prepared for the consequences of your actions. Samantha's lawyer followed suit, but her plea sounded even more hollow. Their downfall was inevitable and thoroughly deserved. After the hearings, I approached David. For the last time, I stared into the eyes of the man I had once loved. This is the end, David. You've lost everything. His eyes flared with anger. You think you've won, Megan? You're as foolish as ever. I shook my head, feeling nothing but pity. No, David, I'm no longer your victim. Goodbye. Later, I visited Samantha in her care facility. She was a shell of her former self, her demanding nature now subdued by the cold reality of her situation. Why, Samantha? I asked. Tears streamed down her face. I was jealous, insecure. David filled my head with lies. I betrayed you, and now I'm paying for it. I sighed deeply, the finality of her words sinking in. You've caused so much pain, Sam, but I hope you find peace someday. Stepping outside, I felt a strange sense of release. The storm had passed, leaving me to pick up the pieces. I was scarred, but stronger. The world outside the courthouse was bright, filled with possibilities. As I walked away, I knew the journey ahead would be about healing and rediscovering myself, free from the shadows of betrayal. The future was mine to shape, and with each step, I embraced the promise of a new beginning. 2 years later, the hospital memories felt like a distant nightmare. Life had moved forward, carrying me with it. I stood in my office, stacks of paperwork before me, yet this time everything felt different. Lighter. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Hey, Megan, ready for lunch? Henry's voice brought a smile to my face. Henry Thompson had walked into my life unexpectedly. We met at a professional event, his kind eyes and genuine smile a stark contrast to everything I had known before. Yeah, let's go, I replied, grabbing my coat. As we walked to the cafe, Henry's hand gently brushed mine, a simple yet comforting gesture. During lunch, he looked at me with a mixture of pride and affection. You've come so far, Megan. I'm amazed at your strength and grace. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread inside. I couldn't have done it without your support, Henry. Our relationship was built on trust and mutual respect, the very things I thought I'd never find again. It reflected my personal growth and newfound independence. Life had its challenges, but I faced them head-on, with Henry by my side. Returning to my apartment that evening, I marveled at how much had changed. The walls now displayed art that I loved, and the spaces reflected my tastes, my choices. June was there, having tea on the balcony. Her presence was a constant reminder of enduring love. Hey, Mom, I greeted, sitting beside her. She smiled, her eyes filled with contentment. Megan, I've watched you rebuild your life from the ground up. I couldn't be prouder. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. My voice was soft, filled with genuine emotion. We chatted about everything and nothing, enjoying the silence that spoke volumes. The turbulence of the past had given way to stillness and healing. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, a sense of peace enveloped me. The scars from the betrayal remained, but they no longer defined me. They were a testament to my resilience, a reminder of the strength I had discovered within myself. The next morning, Henry and I attended a community event. Children laughed, vendors sold crafts, and the air was filled with joy. We wandered through the stalls, soaking in the vibrant atmosphere. Megan, a voice called out. I turned to see an old friend. We exchanged pleasantries, and as the conversation flowed, I realized how far I had come. The community that once knew me through my shattered marriage now saw a woman reborn, thriving amidst newfound freedom. As the sun began to set, Henry and I sat on a park bench, watching the world go by. He turned to me, his expression serious but tender. Megan, I know we've both been through a lot, but I want to build our future together. Will you? Before he could finish, I placed a hand on his. Yes, Henry, I want that too. His smile was radiant, and in that moment, I saw the future, bright and filled with possibility. The journey from betrayal to healing had been long, but it shaped me into someone stronger, wiser. The shadows of the past didn't disappear, but they faded, replaced by the light of new beginnings. Embracing Henry's hand, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had offered me a second chance, and this time I wasn't looking back. The future, with all its promises, awaited, and I was ready to step into it, with hope and newfound courage leading the way.
Overheard my wife telling her friend she regrets settling for me, but later karma hit her hard. All right, so I guess I should start with some context. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and my wife Emma is 24. We've been together for a few years, married for just 3 months. Things have been, well, pretty normal. At least that's what I thought. We'd have the usual ups and downs, but nothing major. Honestly, I thought we were doing fine. Anyway, the other night, something happened that completely flipped my world upside down. I wasn't snooping or anything, but I overheard Emma on the phone while I was passing by our bedroom. I didn't even mean to listen in, but sometimes you catch bits and pieces of conversations, right? Well, this was one of those times, and what I heard has been messing with my head ever since. So, Emma's talking to one of her best friends. I'm not sure who it was, but it sounded like one of those deep, serious talks. You know, the kind where you can tell someone's venting about life. I was about to keep walking, but then I heard my name. That made me pause for a second because, well, who wouldn't? Hearing your name in a private conversation sparks curiosity, even if you don't want it to. Emma says, "Don't settle for just anyone. That's the mistake I made with Michael." My heart stopped. I felt like I got punched in the gut. She went on, "He was my last resort, and now look where it's gotten me." I just stood there, frozen. I couldn't believe what I'd just heard. My wife, the woman I thought was happy with me, saying I was her last resort. I couldn't even process it right away. I felt like my brain was short-circuiting. Like, how do you even react to something like that? My first instinct was to barge in and demand an explanation, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I was too shocked, or maybe I didn't want to hear more. Either way, I just walked away. The rest of the night, I couldn't think about anything else. I tried to act normal around Emma, but it was impossible. Every time I looked at her, I heard those words again in my head. Last resort. It's like they were burned into my brain. I kept asking myself, how long has she felt this way? Has she always thought of me like this? Was I blind this whole time? I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying that conversation over and over. Part of me wanted to believe there was some kind of misunderstanding, that maybe I didn't hear her right. But deep down, I knew what I heard, and there was no twisting it into something else. The thing is, I never saw any signs of this before. Emma always seemed happy, or at least content. Sure, we had our occasional arguments, but who doesn't? There was nothing that made me think she felt trapped or like she had settled for me. It's not like she was forced into this marriage. We were together for a good while before tying the knot. We talked about our future, our goals, even kids someday. None of it ever felt fake or forced. At least, not to me. As I lay there that night, my mind started spiraling. What if she's always felt this way and just never said anything? What if every moment we shared, every "I love you," was just her going through the motions? I felt like a complete idiot, thinking back to all the times I thought we were happy, wondering if it was all just an act on her part. And then another thought hit me. What if there's someone else? I mean, she mentioned settling for me, right? Who's to say there wasn't someone before me that she really wanted to be with? Someone she still thinks about? That thought made my stomach churn. I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole, but once the idea was in my head, it wouldn't leave. By morning, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Emma woke up, looking as cheerful as ever, like nothing had happened. I tried to play it cool, but inside, I was a mess. I couldn't bring myself to confront her right away. I needed more time to figure out what to say and how to say it. But every second I spent not talking about it felt like I was suffocating. Throughout the day, I kept catching myself watching her, analyzing her every move. Was she texting someone else? Did she seem distant? Was she hiding something? Honestly, I felt paranoid, like I was losing my mind. But how could I not? Hearing your partner say you were their last choice messes with you in ways you don't expect. I even thought about talking to one of my friends about it, but I felt too embarrassed. What would I even say? "Hey, I overheard my wife say I was her last resort. What should I do?" It sounds ridiculous, like something out of a bad drama. Plus, I didn't want to paint Emma in a bad light to my friends if this turned out to be something we could work through. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't just brush this under the rug. This was too big to ignore. As the day went on, my anxiety kept building. I knew I had to talk to her, but I couldn't shake the fear of what I might hear. What if she confirmed everything? What if she admitted she didn't really love me? Or worse, what if she just shrugged it off like it didn't matter? The thought of confronting her made my heart race, but I knew avoiding it wouldn't make it go away. By the time evening rolled around, I made up my mind. I had to bring it up, no matter how hard it was. I couldn't live with this gnawing at me. So after dinner, I casually said, "Hey, we should talk later." She looked at me, a bit surprised, but just nodded. Little did she know that conversation would change everything. After overhearing Emma say I was her last resort, my mind was racing. I couldn't shake the words, no matter how much I tried to convince myself that maybe it wasn't as bad as it sounded. The next day, everything felt different. I started noticing little things I hadn't really paid attention to before, or maybe I just didn't want to see them. Emma was acting off. I mean, she still smiled, she still said all the right things, but there was something about the way she carried herself, like she was trying a bit too hard to act normal. Or maybe I was just imagining it because of what I heard. Either way, the tension was there, even if neither of us said anything about it. That morning, as we were having breakfast, I couldn't help but steal glances at her. She was scrolling through her phone like she usually does, but every now and then, I'd catch her typing quickly, then deleting and retyping. I don't know why, but it made me feel uneasy. I asked her casually, "Who are you texting?" She looked up, almost startled, like she didn't expect me to notice. "Oh, just a friend," she said, her voice a little too casual. "You don't know her." And then she went right back to her phone. That wasn't unusual, but now everything felt suspicious. I didn't press her, though. I just nodded and pretended like it didn't bother me. But it did. Throughout the day, I kept replaying her words from the night before. Was she texting the same friend she was talking to on the phone? Or was it someone else? My mind was coming up with 1,000 scenarios, none of them good. I kept thinking, what if she's hiding something? What if there's more to this than just her feeling like she settled for me? Later that afternoon, I caught her again on her phone. This time, she was smiling at the screen. It wasn't the kind of smile you give when you're texting a friend about something funny. It was more intimate. I couldn't help but ask, "What's so funny?" She looked up, quickly locking her phone. "Oh, nothing," she said, brushing it off. "Just a meme." But there was something about the way she said it, like she was trying to keep me from digging any deeper. That's when the doubt really started creeping in. Was there someone else? Was she still talking to an ex or someone from her past? I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband who questions every little thing, but after what I heard, I couldn't help it. Every little action felt like a clue to a bigger secret. The weirdest part was how normal she was acting otherwise, like nothing had changed. We still went about our day, running errands, making dinner, watching TV together, but there was this unspoken tension between us. At least I felt it. I don't know if she did or if she was just that good at pretending. At one point, we were sitting on the couch watching some random show, and she leaned over, resting her head on my shoulder. It felt nice, but it also felt wrong. Like, how could she be so affectionate after what she said? Did she even mean it? Or was this her way of pretending everything was fine? I wanted to say something, to bring it up right then and there, but I couldn't find the right words. What if I was blowing this out of proportion? What if I misunderstood her conversation? But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I kept going back to that one sentence. Michael was my last resort. It wasn't just about the words, it was about the way she said them. There was no hesitation, no hint of a joke. It sounded like something she genuinely believed. And that's what hurt the most. By the end of the day, I was mentally exhausted. I couldn't keep living like this, second-guessing everything she said and did. I knew I had to confront her, but I needed to find the right moment. The problem was, every time I thought about bringing it up, I felt this knot in my stomach. What if the conversation went worse than I expected? What if she confirmed all my worst fears? As we got ready for bed, Emma seemed completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. She kissed me goodnight and rolled over, falling asleep almost instantly. Meanwhile, I was lying there, wide awake, my mind racing with a million thoughts. I started thinking back to all the moments in our relationship where I might have missed signs. Were there times when she seemed distant, but I brushed it off as her having a bad day? Were there moments when she hinted at being unhappy, but I was too blind to see it? And then there was the nagging thought. What if she was comparing me to someone else? Someone she thought was better? The idea of being someone's backup plan, the person they settled for because they couldn't have what they really wanted, made me feel sick. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, trying to figure out my next move. I couldn't keep living with this doubt, but I also couldn't just blurt it out in the middle of the night. I needed to find the right time and the right words. But more importantly, I needed to be ready for whatever she was going to say. Because deep down, I knew that once I opened that door, there was no going back. All right, so after a few days of feeling like my head was about to explode from all the overthinking, I finally decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to talk to Emma. I mean, how do you just sit on something like that? Knowing your wife sees you as a last resort? It was eating me alive, and I knew if I didn't bring it up, I'd probably go insane. That morning, we were both home. I tried to keep things as normal as possible, even though I felt like my heart was racing out of my chest. We had breakfast together, but I couldn't taste a damn thing. I just kept staring at her, trying to figure out how to start the conversation. Every time I opened my mouth to say something, I'd chicken out. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. After we finished eating, I took a deep breath and said, "Hey, Emma, we need to talk." She looked up from her phone, a little surprised, but didn't say anything. I motioned for us to sit in the living room. We sat down on the couch, and the tension in the air was so thick you could probably cut it with a knife. Emma looked at me, her face a mix of curiosity and concern. I could tell she was trying to figure out what was coming. "Okay," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She nodded, still quiet. I took another deep breath, and then just went for it. "A few nights ago, I overheard you on the phone with your friend. You said something about settling for me, and that I was your last resort." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she didn't say anything. It was like time had frozen, and I was just sitting there, waiting for the world's worst news to drop. Finally, she let out a nervous laugh, the kind you do when you're caught off guard. "Wait, you heard that?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I heard everything." She looked down at her hands, fiddling with her fingers. "Michael, I didn't mean it like that. I was just talking with my friend. It was a stupid thing to say." "Stupid?" I repeated, feeling the frustration building up. "Emma, you said I was your last resort. That's not just stupid, that's crushing." She sighed, rubbing her temples like she was trying to think of the right words. "I was venting, okay? It wasn't serious. Sometimes you just say things in the heat of the moment, and they don't mean anything." "Don't mean anything?" I shot back. "Emma, those words don't come out of nowhere. You don't just casually tell someone you settled for your husband unless there's some truth behind it." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and frustration. "It's not like that, Michael. I was talking about how everyone feels pressure to get married, to settle down. I was just, I don't know, venting about life." "But why say that about me? About us?" I asked, my voice rising a little. "If you were just venting, you could have said anything else. Why did it have to be about settling for me?" Emma shook her head, tears starting to well up in her eyes. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I love you, Michael. I really do. I was just feeling stressed, and it came out wrong." I wanted to believe her, I really did. But something about the whole thing felt off, like there was more she wasn't telling me. "Emma, I need to know. Do you really feel like you settled for me? Like I was your last resort?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down again, avoiding my eyes. The silence was deafening, and every second that passed felt like an eternity. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know." That hit me like a ton of bricks. "You don't know?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "What does that even mean?" "It means I don't know how I feel sometimes," she said, her voice trembling. "I love you, but sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. Not because of you, but because of me. I'm scared I rushed into this too fast, and now I don't know how to fix it." I leaned back on the couch, trying to process everything. Part of me was angry, but another part just felt sad, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "So what now?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "What are we supposed to do with this?" Emma wiped her eyes, sniffling. "I don't know," she said again. "I didn't want to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen." We sat there in silence for what felt like forever. Neither of us knew what to say or where to go from here. The only thing I knew for sure was that our marriage was now on shaky ground, and I didn't know if we could fix it. After the conversation with Emma, everything felt like it was hanging by a thread. It was awkward, tense, and honestly exhausting. We didn't talk much the rest of that day. It was like we both needed space but were too afraid to actually say it. Every little thing felt heavy, like we were walking on eggshells around each other. The next morning, things were no better. We went through the usual motions. Breakfast, getting ready for the day, but it was like we were on autopilot. I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. I don't know. Those 3 words just kept replaying in my head. It felt like a death sentence for our marriage, but at the same time, it left everything so open-ended. Like there was no real closure. Emma was unusually quiet too. Normally, she's the one who keeps the conversation going, but now it was like she was lost in her own thoughts. I caught her staring at her phone a lot, probably texting that same friend from before. I didn't have the energy to ask about it, though. I was too drained to even care at that point. By the afternoon, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I needed to get out of the house. I told Emma I was going for a walk, and she just nodded, not even looking up from her phone. That stung more than I expected. I walked around aimlessly for a while, trying to clear my head, but no matter how far I walked, I couldn't escape the storm inside me. When I got back, Emma was in the same spot on the couch, still glued to her phone. I don't know why, but seeing her like that made something snap inside me. I blurted out, "Emma, we need to figure this out. We can't keep pretending everything's fine." She looked up, startled. "I know," she said quietly. "I just don't know where to start." "Start by being honest with me," I said, my voice more forceful than I intended. "Do you even want to be in this marriage? Because right now it feels like you're already checked out." She bit her lip, clearly struggling with what to say. "Michael, I don't want to hurt you, but I feel so confused. I thought getting married would make things clearer, but it's only made me realize how unsure I am." That was like another punch to the gut. "So what are you saying? You want out?" "I don't know," she repeated, and I felt like I was going in circles. "I just need time to figure out what I really want." Time. That's always the go-to, isn't it? But time wasn't what I needed. I needed answers. I needed to know if we had a future or if I was just wasting my time holding on to something that was already dead. "Emma, time isn't going to fix this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're either in this together or we're not. Sitting around waiting isn't going to magically make things better." She looked away, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know what you want me to say, Michael. I'm scared. I don't want to make the wrong decision." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "And what about me? Do you think this is easy for me? I'm sitting here questioning everything about our relationship, wondering if you ever really loved me, or if I was just the guy you settled for because you didn't want to be alone." Her head snapped back to me. "That's not fair. I do love you, Michael. I'm scared I rushed into this." "Then why didn't you say something before we got married?" I asked, feeling the frustration boil over. "You had every chance to call it off if you weren't sure." "Because I thought I could make it work," she admitted. "I didn't want to disappoint you. I didn't want to be alone." There it was. The truth I had been dreading but half expected. She stayed with me out of fear, not love, and now we were both paying the price for it. We sat in silence for a long time after that, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I didn't know what to say anymore. What do you even say to someone who's basically told you they're not sure if they want to be with you? Eventually, Emma spoke up. "Maybe we need some space, just for a little while, to think things through." "Space," I repeated, almost laughing at the irony. "We've been living in the same house, but we've already been worlds apart for days now. What difference would more space make?" She didn't have an answer for that, and honestly, neither did I. We were stuck in this weird limbo, and it was tearing us both apart. That night, we slept in the same bed, but it felt like we were miles away from each other. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we got to this point, wondering if there was any way to fix it, or if this was the beginning of the end. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what we decided, things would never be the same again. After everything that had happened, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay stuck in this limbo forever. Emma's indecision, her "I don't know" about our marriage, was like a slow poison. It was eating away at me, and if I didn't do something soon, it was going to destroy me. I needed to take control of my own life, even if that meant walking away from the person I thought I'd spend forever with. The next morning, I woke up feeling more determined than I had in days. Emma was still asleep, curled up on her side of the bed, looking peaceful, like none of this was weighing on her as much as it was on me. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe she had already mentally checked out, and I was the one left holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. I got up quietly and went to the living room. Sitting there, I started thinking about what my life would look like without Emma. It was scary, sure, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I'd been living in fear long enough. Fear of losing her, fear of being alone, fear of starting over. But maybe, just maybe, being alone was better than being someone's last resort. I spent the day gathering my thoughts, figuring out what I wanted to say to her. I wasn't going to let this drag on any longer. It was time for us to have a real conversation, one that wasn't filled with half-truths and I don't knows. That evening after dinner, I sat her down. "Emma, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. She looked at me, her face serious. "Okay." I took a deep breath. I've been doing a lot of thinking, about us, about everything that's happened, and I can't keep living like this. I need to know if we're going to fix this, or if it's time to move on. Emma looked down, fiddling with the edge of her sweater. "I've been thinking too," she said softly. "And I don't think I can give you the answer you're looking for." I nodded, expecting that response but still feeling the sting of it. "Then I think it's best if we go our separate ways," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I love you, Emma, but I can't be in a marriage where I'm not someone's first choice. I deserve more than that." She started to cry, and for a moment I felt like a jerk. But I knew this was the right decision. Staying together out of fear or guilt wasn't fair to either of us. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered through her tears. "I know," I said, "and I don't want to hurt you either. But sometimes the best thing we can do is let go." We sat there in silence for a while, both of us trying to process what was happening. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. But it was my life, and I had to own it. The next few days were rough. We started the process of separating, figuring out who would keep what, and how we were going to handle the logistics of splitting up. It was awkward and painful, but also necessary. Every step we took felt like another weight being lifted off my shoulders, even though it hurt like hell. One night, as I was packing up some of my things, Emma came into the room. "Michael," she said quietly, "I hope you find someone who makes you happy. Someone who can be everything you need." I looked at her, my chest tightening. "I hope you find that too," I said. And that was it. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no long speeches, just two people realizing that sometimes love isn't enough, and it's okay to let go. After Emma moved out, I started focusing on myself. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in a while, threw myself into work, and started figuring out who I was outside of my marriage. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I missed her so much it physically hurt, but I knew I was doing the right thing. One night, a few weeks after Emma left, I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, when I stumbled across an old photo of us. We looked so happy, so in love. For a moment, I felt a pang of regret, wondering if there was something more I could have done to save us. But then I remembered everything we'd been through, all the pain and confusion, and I realized that sometimes the best thing you can do is let go. I'm not saying I have it all figured out now. I'm still healing, still figuring out what comes next. But for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. I know I deserve to be with someone who sees me as their first choice, someone who loves me without hesitation or doubt. And I'm willing to wait for that. Moving forward isn't easy, but it's necessary, and I'm ready to take that step. Update 1. So it's been about a month since Emma and I decided to split. It hasn't been easy, but I've been doing my best to move on. I focused on work, caught up with friends, and tried to find some normalcy in this mess. I thought I was making progress, you know? I was starting to feel like myself again. But then, life decided to throw another punch at me. One day I was hanging out with a buddy of mine. We were catching up, talking about random stuff, when he casually dropped a bomb. "Hey, did you know Emma's dating someone?" he asked, like it was no big deal. I nearly choked on my drink. "Wait, what? Already?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah," he said, looking a bit uncomfortable. "I saw her at a coffee shop the other day. She was with this guy. They looked close." My heart sank. I mean, I knew we were over, but hearing she was already seeing someone else hit me harder than I expected, especially since we weren't even divorced yet. The paperwork was still being finalized, and here she was, moving on like it was nothing. I tried to play it cool, acting like it didn't bother me. "Do you know who the guy is?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He hesitated for a second. "I think it's that guy she used to talk about before you two got married. You know, the one she had some history with." That's when it all clicked. The constant texting, the weird behavior, her being glued to her phone during those last few weeks. It wasn't just her being distant, it was him. She had been talking to this guy the whole time, even before we decided to split. I didn't say much after that. I just nodded and changed the subject, but inside, I was fuming. I felt betrayed all over again. Not because she was dating someone, that was her choice, but because of the timing. It felt like our entire marriage was a joke to her, like she had one foot out the door long before we even said our goodbyes. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I replayed every moment of our last month together, every time she was on her phone, every time she brushed off my questions. It all made sense now. She wasn't just distant, she was checked out, already focused on someone else. The next morning, I decided to confront her. Not because I wanted to get back together or anything like that, but because I needed closure. I needed to hear it from her, to understand why she couldn't just be honest with me from the start. I sent her a message asking if we could talk. She agreed, and we met up later that day at a park. It was weird seeing her again, especially knowing what I knew now. She looked nervous, like she knew what was coming. Emma, I started, keeping my voice calm. I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. She nodded, not saying a word. I heard you've been seeing someone, I said, watching her reaction closely. Is it true? Her eyes widened for a second, and then she looked away. Yeah, she admitted quietly. I've been seeing someone. Is it the same guy you were talking to before we separated? I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it from her. She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, it's him. I felt a mix of anger and sadness. So, you've been talking to him this whole time? I asked, even when we were still trying to figure things out? She looked down, guilt written all over her face. I didn't plan for it to happen like this, she said. We started talking again and it felt right. Right? I repeated, my voice rising a bit. Emma, we were still married. We were supposed to be working on us, and you were already moving on with someone else. I know, she said, her voice shaking. I'm sorry, Michael. I didn't mean to hurt you. Hearing her apologize didn't make me feel any better. In fact, it just made me angrier. If you were talking to him the whole time, why didn't you just tell me? Why drag this out? I didn't know how to, she admitted. I was scared. I didn't want to hurt you more than I already had. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You managed to do that anyway. We sat there in silence for a while, neither of us knowing what to say. I wanted to scream, to yell at her for being so selfish, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was done, and there was no going back. Finally, I stood up. I hope he's worth it, I said, my voice cold. I hope you're happy with him. Michael, she started, but I cut her off. I don't want to hear it, I said. Just finish the divorce papers and let's be done with this. I walked away, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. I was finally done with Emma, but the pain of betrayal was still fresh. It would take time to heal, but at least now I knew the truth. Moving forward wasn't going to be easy, but at least now I could do it without looking back. Update 2. It's been a few weeks since I confronted Emma about seeing that guy, and honestly, I thought I was done with all the drama. The divorce papers were still in process, but I'd been keeping my distance from her and focusing on rebuilding my life. Things were slowly getting better. I was starting to feel more like myself, even if the whole situation still left a bad taste in my mouth. Then, one evening, I got a message from Emma. Just seeing her name pop up on my phone made my stomach twist. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was short and vague. Can we talk? It's important. I rolled my eyes thinking, what now? Part of me wanted to ignore her, but another part was curious. What could she possibly want after everything? Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her the next day. When we met at a coffee shop, Emma looked like a wreck. Her eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying for days. She was fidgeting, barely able to look me in the eye. I didn't feel sympathy, though. All I could think about was how much she had hurt me and how I wasn't going to let her back into my life. Michael, she started, her voice shaky. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to tell you something. I folded my arms, leaning back in my chair. What is it, Emma? She took a deep breath, tears already welling up in her eyes. The guy I was seeing, he was cheating on me. He was seeing another girl the whole time we were together. I blinked, not expecting that. I didn't say anything, just let her keep talking. I found out a few days ago, she continued, her voice breaking. I confronted him, and he admitted it. He didn't even try to deny it. I feel so stupid, Michael. I left you, and for what? For someone who didn't even care about me. She started crying, covering her face with her hands. I sat there feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and indifference. This was karma, Plain and simple. She'd betrayed me for a guy who turned out to be a player, and now she was reaping what she'd sown. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I made such a huge mistake. I thought I wanted something else, but I see now how wrong I was. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I had to tell you." I waited a moment, letting her cry. Then I said, "Emma, I appreciate you telling me the truth, but it doesn't change anything." She looked up, her eyes pleading. "Michael, I know I messed up, but can't we at least try to fix things? I still love you. I realize now that you were the best thing that ever happened to me." I shook my head. "Emma, you didn't love me. You loved the idea of not being alone. And when things got tough, you ran to someone else. I can't be with someone who only comes back when things don't work out with someone else." She reached across the table, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "Please, Michael," she whispered. "Give me another chance. I'll do anything to make it right." I stood up, my voice firm. "Emma, it's too late. I've moved on, and you need to do the same. I deserve someone who chooses me first, not someone who settles or comes crawling back when things go wrong." Her face crumpled, and she started crying again, but I didn't feel sorry for her. This was her mess, not mine. "I'm sorry, Emma," I said, softer this time. "But we're done." I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her there in tears. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt free. Emma's betrayal had been a painful chapter in my life, but now it was finally closed. Karma had done its job, and I was ready to move forward for real.